Hello, my name is Kast. I'm a music producer and an instructor at Garden Chalet, where I've taught Logic Pro and related classes to it for the past couple years, and I've used the software for more than a decade myself. Now, I have the great joy of working with a lot of new students on Logic, beginners, sometimes intermediates, and when they first come into class, one of the first things that I focus on with them, before even going into a lot of advanced features, is just the little habits that they've built up that I can tell are making the music creation process a lot more slow and frustrating for them, really blocking their creative output. Now, I'm not really a big advocate in learning every key command or every feature in Logic. I don't think that's a great way to be your most creative self, but I do believe that there's a lot of really basic habits that have such a high return on investment in terms of the speed and the lack of frustration that you'll feel once you have them under your fingers to make music. So I'd like to share some of the ones that I'm most often trying to impart on my students in this video today. Let's start really simply with the playhead and the transport controls. Now, just to review, the playhead is this horizontal line up here where it shows what we're playing and we can move it around. And then the transport controls are these very basic, familiar buttons up here: play, pause, record. Starting with the playhead, the default for the playhead is that when we play something and then we pause our playback and then we play it again, the playhead is just going to pick up right where we left off. Now, I can sort of imagine why they decided to do this and why this would be a default, right? If we're listening to music, we want the playback to pick up right where we left off. But when we're creating music ourselves, we very often want to hone in on one specific spot and not be constantly dragging the playhead back every time that we want to hear that section again. Now, we could use the loop feature, which does that automatically by default, but I actually like to go one step further. I go to Navigate, Play Button Options, and Play from Last Locate Position. This is the setting that I like to have on and that everyone else I know likes to have on, where if you play it, every time it will start off at the last selection that you made. Now, getting into the transport controls, this may sound a little crazy or radical, but I like to right-click up here, customize control bar and display, which has a lot of great stuff in it if you weren't aware. And I like to just go in and hide everything. Now, why do I do this? I'm gonna bring it back for a second. Why do I do this? It's because to me, these are like the controls that you're going to be using thousands, millions of times. You want to just be as comfortable and as smooth with these as possible by using your keyboard and not, finding the place to click every time. Get yourself in that really good habit and the time you save will be racked up. If memorizing all of these seems like a big deal, which, is understandable, the good news is that really you don't need all of these. I find that I primarily am only using play, record, and cycle. So these are relatively easy to memorize. Play is as simple as the space bar. Record, also very easy, the R key. It's really nice. And then the cycle, right, we can trigger on and off with C. I tend to actually use my mouse for this to, select a region and then click to turn it on and off. But still, it's so much easier to do that I don't really see why I need to have this button up here. So I like to hide everything. And I think that just forces you to do these really basic things in the most efficient way. Now let's move on to another really basic feature that unfortunately is a little bit more complicated in Logic than other softwares, and I find more than any other feature is the thing that is really frustrating to students just starting out. And this is the simple act of dragging things around and moving them. Now the issue here is this smart snap feature, where if I am moving this audio region around, Logic will lock onto the beat, but it will also let me move it off of the beat and release it there. And this is well-intentioned, but what I find so often when I listen to students' projects, there's just all sorts of things that have accidentally fallen off of the beat, that are in the wrong place, and it's a really big, frustrating mess to clean up. And very often, the student won't actually know what's wrong in the first place, and it won't be until we go in and really zoom and see, oh hey, that's a tiny bit off, that the problem of why things aren't feeling right is revealed. So in SmartSnap's defense, this is something that I find to be a useful feature if you purposely are moving things off of the grid a little bit in your music. But if that doesn't fit into your workflow, you may want to turn this off. You can go up here to the snap settings and you can change this to something like beat or division, like so, and that will lock your movements to the grid, which might save you a lot of trouble. One thing that you might want to be aware of is that a lot of samples and things won't actually be perfectly aligned to the grid, right? Like this kick that I have here, it starts a little bit late, so I might want to turn this Smart Snap off, or I can also use Command G to do that, and then lock it to the grid, and then when I move, it will still be attached to the relative grid position by having this selected, which is the default. Now, if you do want to use the Smart Snap tool, which I use and I recommend for a lot of people, there's two things that I think you should get familiar with. And the first is that when you're clicking and dragging things around, keeping an eye on this black window underneath it. This is going to show you the position and the relative motion that you're making. So want to make sure that, you know, the position is that nice even number that ends with a bunch of ones. That's saying, you know, this is the very start of this beat. And then making sure that the relative thing to the right of that thing that's minus 0.220, making sure that that is ending in a 0 or, you know, in some other even way, and not like this where it's going to end up offbeat. And the second thing that I recommend is just getting very familiar with your zoom controls, right? So on a trackpad, this is pretty easy. It's you know, this horizontal pinch to zoom in, and it's option scroll to zoom up vertically. On a mouse, it's a little bit more confusing. I have a magic mouse, which works really well. We just option scroll in either direction, but with a trackball mouse, you might need to use option shift and scroll. But yeah, I find it's very useful just to get comfortable with zooming in and zooming out wherever you want to be able to see what's going on and double check your work. I think that will help things quite a bit. Now, on a very similar note, another thing that I see causing a lot of trouble is just drawing in or editing MIDI performances, right? So I just have this blank MIDI instrument here. If I create a MIDI region by control clicking, I can go in and draw some MIDI using the command key. A lot of students find this really frustrating, and you know, watching over their shoulder, I know that they could be doing it a lot faster. Now, one thing that I end up recommending to a lot of students is to just practice drawing in MIDI that's not a part of your song, right? So when you're not focused on being creative, just, you know, draw in some scales, right? And get used to using useful commands like Command R to duplicate things, or Option Drag to duplicate things. Just getting familiar with being able to do this quickly. You know, if the way that I'm able to do this now seems overwhelming and fast to you, you may want to consider just offline practicing moving things around. I think when you are in the depths of creation, you'll appreciate the time that you spent getting comfortable with your mouse and keyboard. So that's all for now. These are really simple things, but they're real issues that I see students having. So hopefully you learned something useful from this, and if you didn't, congratulations, you've developed some good habits yourself. So from Garnish LA, happy music making.